Okay. And then I would love to really welcome you. And before we start this session, I will say some practical things, but also welcome to all places, people from all places, colors, genders, ages, abilities, and religions. And welcome to the voice of nature, and welcome to our ancestors that we carry inside us, and those that come 7 generations after us. And welcome to this learning session about rewilding. And in the conversation I had with Koen beforehand, I became very enthusiastic about what he had to say based on his experience and knowledge. So I'm really looking forward to this learning session. Oh, and there are coming some more people. Hi, Joyce. And for those who are not familiar yet with the Regeneration Cooperative, let me briefly introduce to you what we do. We started 3 years ago based on the need for a hopeful narrative, a narrative in which humans leave a positive footprint on landscapes and on communities. And this winter learning session is part of the 4-season program. And the goal of this program is to contribute to a system change. And all activities contribute to the growth and the prosperity of the regenerative movement in the Netherlands. And we motivate individuals like you who have hope in the future and take action to enable the transition to a healthy and fair society in collaboration with nature. Well, practicalities. If you have a question, but you don't feel comfortable asking it in English, please feel free to ask your question in Dutch, and we will translate the question for you. If you have a question during the story of Koen, then you can ask it in the chat. And after the story of Koen, we will ask your question. But you can also unmute yourself at the end of the session. And after this session, I will also share a link in the chat where you can leave a donation. And this donation will be used to support the 4-season program. And feel free to contribute whatever suits your situation. And I will also share the link to an agenda where you will find the coming activities. And Laura, she's also in the session, the co-founder of the Regeneration Cooperative, will tell something about the wonderful regeneration weeks in spring in Catalonia. Well, enough talking from my side. I'll give the floor to you, Koen.
Thanks very much, Franca, and thank you all for your willingness to listen to me. And thank you so much for having me here. I'm new to your group, I think, or to your network, and I think there's a lot of overlap, and we've kind of been working on parallel things, and I suspect that will become clear throughout this presentation. I think it will take about 30 minutes or so, the presentation, and I'm very happy to dive into a discussion with you afterwards. But of course, also in between, if something's really odd or not clear, just let me know as well. And I'll try to take that on board. I'll make my screen, enlarge it. Yeah, so this is kind of a presentation about the nexus between rewilding and a kind of a practical interpretation of the idea of the concept, which in this case is about a wild year. And yeah, maybe I'll just start off very briefly so you've got an idea from an idea about where I come from and how I engage with these topics. So I always wanted to become a forester. I knew that from a very young age, when uncles always ask or aunties ask, what do you want to become when you grow up or when you're bigger? And then I think I said from a very early age, forester. I'm not really sure what I had in mind with that. I think just walking around with binoculars and looking at birds. But I was a lot in nature, in the woods. I grew up in the countryside in Brabant. Which is a very paradoxical kind of place because there's a high intensive agricultural land use going on and many other things that destroy nature to a large degree. But then there's also really beautiful little gems here and there, and they were my kind of refugee places, so to speak, to find what I was looking for. So when you want to become a forester, you can do that at various levels, and from a very practical level to a more conceptual, analytical level. And eventually, I don't know where and when and so forth, but I kind of moved more towards the university side of things, and I studied forest and nature conservation at the Weer in Wageningen. And I kind of stayed in that scene ever since. I did a PhD and a postdoc in Scotland on reintroductions, animal reintroductions. Think of like the white-tailed eagle and the beaver and the lynx. And I looked at kind of the social dimensions of these, so how they, what it generates, sometimes also conflict. And then we worked in the Pantanal, the Brazilian Pantanal, also looking at jaguar governance and the intersections with tourism. Worked in India for a while. And then also I started part-time again back at my old nest at the chair group, the Forest and Nature Conservation Policy Chair Group at the Wageningen University. And I've been there now for about 8-9 years or so. I'm doing research still and I'm teaching. And beyond that, because it's a kind of a very small world in academia where, you kind of, someone calls it writing consistently boring papers, and in a way, for me, that's not always so satisfying. So I also try to reach a larger audience in different ways, and one of the things I really enjoy is trying to think about these topics differently, more openly, in a kind of a non-academic discourse as well. And some of the books that you see in the bottom left, Wild Year and IJsbeeren met Optimisme, are examples of that. And then in addition, I often, or for a long time, I've been leading a kind of a double life, where I would go out in the evenings or in the weekends or in holidays and kind of engage and immerse myself in nature very practically with through bushcraft or scouts or whatever. And I kind of realized that these two worlds didn't need to be separate. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later in the presentation. But this kind of nature skill idea as a lens to engage with nature experience and to think about nature experience more broadly, and nature conservation as well, is something that keeps popping up. I want to introduce to you the concept of rewilding, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it. I assume you may have heard it here and there, but maybe you may not know that much about it. Basically, in a nutshell, this is how it could be summarized: think big, act wild. According to nature conservation organizations who are pushing for this. So Rewilding Britain is a kind of a prominent organization. But this big thinking is really crucial in rewilding, in ecological rewilding. And then we talk about big areas, big animals, big timescales, so beyond the human timescale. And then the ambitions are usually big as well. But I think one of the weaker points of the whole discourse at the moment is that it really goes into dialogue with nature conservation, mainstream nature conservation. So in a way, it's kind of breaking away from what we call in Dutch a doeltype approach to nature conservation, where you say, okay, we're going to protect these red list species or these areas, and we kind of put a fence around it, either metaphorically or physically, or both, and then and then we try to kind of keep everything more or less stable. And this rewilding thinking is engaging with concepts of nature in a very different way, which is great, and I think it has many merits in an ecological sense. But I think it falls short a little bit in many other ways, or in a couple of other important ways. I would also argue that mainstream nature conservation is a bit problematic in itself, and probably not the right benchmark to compare against. So You probably noticed, but I think nature conservation has a kind of a bad track record when you think of the fortress conservation model, the Yellowstone model. Yellowstone was the first national park in the world that was erected in 1872. And that became a bit of a blueprint for, what they call the Yellowstone model of conservation around the world through colonialism in Africa, partly South America as well, Asia. These kind of big areas were conserved, sometimes indeed fences around it, and usually would also lead to local people, indigenous peoples being removed from the lands. And so what you would see is indigenous people having to leave, and back came in white people, researchers, scientists, or recreationist tourists. And I think this is something of the past, of course, a colonial past, but it's still visible and still popping up in many different shapes and forms today still. So it's in that sense, it's not just something of the past, it also continues in many ways today. I think also this relates to the word nature already, like nature versus culture. There is a split there, a dichotomy. And in a way, traditional nature conservation keeps perpetuating this dichotomy, this split between humans on the one hand, and nature on the other hand. I think it's getting better in some ways, but there's a limited dialogue with other domains as well of societies, whether that's healthcare or education or whatever. It's very much nature conservation is something that's done by NGOs and maybe by governments to some extent, to a limited extent, and by professionals. And then separate from that, there's kind of nature experience, but by and large, it doesn't feel like an integrated whole. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that later as well. But this comes with bureaucracy, and bureaucracy can be very useful, and it also helps to enforce laws, regulations that are set up to protect nature. But you could still ask the question whether modern day nature conservation is actually that effective. And if you look at the decline of species still, red list species, or the loss of primary forest, for instance, it doesn't seem to be so effective. Now then, of course, in a neoliberal world, we are kind of firefighting. It's marginal gains for nature conservation in this kind of overwhelming system where basically the dollar rules or the euro rules. And then I think we get to a core point, which is that basically nature conservation is a type of symptom treatment. We protect species and so forth from going extinct, but we're maybe not banking or relying enough on the natural resilience of areas. And the bigger these areas are, and that's exactly what rewilding is looking for, the more resilient it becomes. But even then, I think rewilding is still operating in the margin of areas that have already been designated as natural and so forth in legislation. So I think all in all, mainstream nature conservation is not really such a challenging kind of dot on the horizon to compare against, because it's not really addressing any root causes of various environmental crises that we're facing today. So my plea is to rethink this rewilding idea, move away from something that's purely ecological or primary ecological. There's a famous kind of slogan of the 3 C's in rewilding that's coined in the 1980s, early 1990s. So that's cores, carnivores, and corridors. And that kind of summarizes, I think, even today still to a large extent what rewilding is about, ecological rewilding. So I would argue that it can be more than that. It can also be more than just a particular form of ecological restoration. And I would argue that rewilding really needs to engage with these root causes of environmental crises. And then, of course, the question is, what are these root causes? Well, I think neoliberalism is one core issue, but I think another one, and that's one that I focus on mostly, is this human disconnect from nature. And so, therefore, I kind of come to this very simple point of view or stance that I think that rewilding really should be reframed into a narrative, a transition narrative that stimulates this natural connection human connection with nature. And I'll tell you a little bit more about how shocking that is or not shocking. But I think by and large, often, even today, rewilding projects kind of ignore the human element a bit. And I think that's what I wanted to show here. So you could argue, yeah, but rewilding, it's just a form of nature conservation, and that includes humans from the onset. And this is true, but I think we can recognize very specific roles that pop up every time. And these are the roles of experts. So there'll be people like researchers or people working at NGOs and kind of championing certain projects. And then kind of when the project's ongoing or afterwards, then recreationists come in and people enjoy whatever this kind of rewilded area of nature is. And then there's kind of local stakeholders, usually people with, a little business, who then connect to opportunities around tourism, people that maybe want to sell their land or not want to sell the land, maybe local farmers who are involved or not involved in rewilding, and so forth. But I think this fits very much a kind of a managerial approach to rewilding, a project approach, like, okay, there's a challenge or an opportunity somewhere in the landscape, and then we kind of, we come together with different stakeholders and make plans and all this in the context of what's possible legally and so forth, and then we get somewhere, and usually that takes a while. But I think my point here is that rewilding that involves humans is maybe something different from what I would call human rewilding. And I know that any connection to a large human project as such, it can be a bit of a slippery slope. But I will explain now in various steps what I mean with this. It's, by the way, not necessarily my idea. I mean, I try to develop it a bit, but I'm building on the work of Paul Jepson and Beckhoff and Monbiot, his book Feral, which is problematic, I think, for all kinds of reasons, but at least I think he gets the point of human inclusion to some extent. We can have a nice discussion about that later, I think. Yeah, it's a kind of a working definition. I follow Lisbeth Bakker's ecological definition that she used in a bundle, an essay bundle that we wrote together. Lisbeth Bakker is a professor in rewilding ecology, the first one in the Netherlands, and probably also the first one in the world, even though a lot of ecologists have been devoting their careers to rewilding here and there. But she says, okay, so what is ecological rewilding? Well, giving more space to natural processes in the most basic sense. And then, of course, you can fill it in with more detail. But I think that idea is a nice one to start from. And then what I would say, human rewilding, well, that's kind of similar then, giving more space to natural processes in human life. And I want to show you some key principles that I think should be kind of developed and worked with when we engage human rewilding. And they are inclusion, embodiment, integration, and transformation. I'm just going to talk you through these one by one. So inclusion, and Franca mentioned this already at the start, acknowledging that anyone's welcome, regardless of background and so forth. And I think, in a way, nature conservation has been too long, for too many decades and centuries, something that was specifically exclusive. And the social plurality is really key if we want to do something with rewilding as a transition narrative. I also think that this plurality can go beyond the human. So I think there's more and more attention now for non-human voices as well, whether that's in a legal setting or otherwise. But I think it feeds straight into also relationships that we build up with other entities, non-human entities, as people outside in nature. By the way, the self-willed voice, it's a word I like a lot, self-willed. The etymological root of wild goes back to self-willed originally, and Kind of, we're talking, I think, 7th, 8th century or so in Germanic languages. And I really like that. So even today, when you ask, okay, so what is wild, and what is wilderness in the context of nature, then, well, you could say, well, at least something where human design is maybe more absent and the self-will of these natural entities is quite strong. Yeah, I think it also should be open to anyone, right? And that also means accepting any entry point, either specialists, people who've been working with nature and engaging with nature all their lives, but also people who are completely new to it and feel they don't know a lot, but are simply curious and interested. I think accessibility is also really important. Like traditionally, when we talk of nature experience, it's something that white people do, white men usually, in the kind of the strength of their lives, and they go and climb a mountain or something like this. This has been changing, obviously, in recent decades, but nonetheless, I think, very different questions come up when you think of people who are less able to do so. And there's obviously also an economic dimension to this. So who can afford it to have, one, spare time, and then two, go out into nature areas and do spectacular things, as we now often seem to seek for. I think that this idea of engaging with true wildernesses somewhere in Alaska or in a faraway place may have its uses for some people sometimes, but I think we really need to understand and look for nature that's really close to us. And this means nature anywhere, including in cities. This could be on rooftops, it could be vertical gardens, it could be guerrilla garden patches, it could be the flower in the crack of a pavement. I think true sustainable nature connection really starts with understanding this idea of nature in different ways. Yeah, embodiment is really a key one as far as I'm concerned. This old slogan of head, heart, hands, and the senses obviously is something that coming from an academic environment is something that's usually ignored, right? So we tend to go from the heart primarily and usually only. And really kind of forget that a lot of learning goes actually through the hands. A lot of passion and engagement goes exactly through that. So in a way, there's a paradox as well, because academics are expected to be passionate about their topic, but at the same time, it has to remain rational at all times. Now, this embodiment is really important for relational engagement with other things, non-human things in natural environments. And then I often find that this whole dichotomy issue of human versus nature and so forth disappears very quickly, because there's just simply no need for these kind of concepts and categories. And it's really easy to illustrate, because if you are in nature, you're in a forest or you're at a stream set, then the word nature doesn't really make sense anymore, because you're kind of there, you're part of it. You don't see nature around you, but you see a butterfly or a tree or whatever, you see something happening. But the word nature doesn't make sense. And I think that really becomes stronger the moment you engage with relational connections. I also think that human evolution has a word to say in all this, in that our understanding of where we came from, evolution from an evolutionary point of view, still can inform us on who we are today and how we kind of engage with nature. And put simply, I don't think we're really been made to sit behind a screen for 8 hours a day on a chair. Our kind of bodies protest and I think in an urbanizing, globalizing, digitalizing world, our bodies are kind of protesting a lot. So there's I think many ways that we can tap into that, but also think of psychological elements and so forth. There's so much to be understood there and to be experienced. Control and freedom is also really nice. When you're out there, out and about, then very quickly you feel the limitations of your own body. You also feel the importance to control the things you can control, also for kind of self-protection, be staying warm or whatever it is, but then also the freedom once you've kind of taken care of that and you've kind of moved beyond that, which can be extremely liberating. I think traditional ecological knowledge is a concept that's problematic for all kinds of ways, and we associate it with indigenous peoples and so forth. But I think even in contemporary times, it has a really an important, important messages for us, and it's an important concept to look at the world, I think, and to perform the world. And skill is for me particularly something that I like focusing on, because it kind of combines the conceptual with the physical, with the emotional. And this is just a kind of a bit of a contrast to the skill idea. I mean, we've lost so much skill today in our contemporary environments, right? In our urban environments, we can hardly do anything with hands other than typing very fast. And this I came across a couple of years ago on the Dutch news site, that surgeons were worried about the increasing number of hand wounds from pitting avocados in the kitchen. So we've got here a fruit from far away, and we've got people with knives in the kitchen who are able to injure themselves apparently more easily than you would expect. And then the solution, according to the surgeon, is to buy this plastic device from I think some factory somewhere in China, and it goes into a big container ship. It costs €1, which is also in itself bizarre, or something can cost €1. And this is specifically made to, you can see there on the right, to de-stone avocados. And interestingly, it can do a couple of things, but beyond the avocado, it can't do anything. And when I engage with students now, and also through...
Oh, Maya, you have to put yourself up on mute. Yeah.
And also through courses with students, is that we kind of really emphasize technique over technology. And yeah, this is an example here. I set up with colleagues a new course, which is called Anthropology of Basic Nature Skill, or Outdoor Skill. And what we do is we do very practical stuff: fire making, shelter building. Here we make fire with a bow drill. And then we connect that to academic depth, analytical depth. We read anthropological texts about, for instance, the meaning of fire for communities around the world, and so forth. We also link it to environmental sustainability, so we look at fire use in contemporary times and so forth. And yeah, I was worried about, receiving criticism from colleagues and others about, should this have a place at academia? Is this not something you do at the Scouts in the weekend, and so forth? But actually, that critique didn't come so much. And I think what was most encouraging was to see the learning trajectory of the students, and how they, completely absorbed both the physical things as well as the theoretical depth. And yeah, I could honestly say that out of the 8-9 years of teaching there, and also having a lot of experience with more traditional forms of teaching or education, this is really a truly potential for transformation. And that's what students themselves also indicate. So for me, this is what I mentioned earlier, these kind of two worlds coming together. And that's what I'm working on more and more now. And it just kind of really touches me in the core, and it feels right in every way. So there will be more more to follow for me on this front as well. Now, then also I want to mention integration, and I alluded to this a little bit already, that I think in our contemporary society, we love drawing up kind of divisions and categories, and nature experience and nature conservation are already separate often, but then also daily life consumption patterns stand apart from that, and then environmental sustainability and the global environmental crises are kind of disconnected. And I think this is problematic for all kinds of reasons. You see some overlap somewhere sometimes, right? For instance, with with the nitrogen crisis now, where you see that environmental sustainability and daily consumption patterns actually interact a lot. So we kind of know this, and at the same time, we go about through our lives as if they're completely separate still. So we have our electric car, and then on Sunday afternoon, we go for a walk in a nature area and feel kind of rejuvenated again. And then on Monday, we go and sit for 8 hours a day behind the screen. And that's how we kind of go through our years. And I think there's so much to be explored here in terms of integrating this modern lifestyle, contemporary lifestyle, which I think can still be embraced. It's not like we need to go back to walk around in buckskin and make fire with a bow drill all the time. I think there's just plenty of room to look for these gray areas where these two worlds or multiple worlds meet. It also, would also assume a kind of a multi-level approach from health through our guts and the bacteria that are in our guts to health at the kind of the level, the planetary level, the biomes, and so forth. And then, of course, ideally, it would involve many more societal actors than is currently happening, and we would see action on both an individual as well as a community level. Yeah, and then maybe this kind of transformative potential, I think, of human rewilding as an idea, as a concept, and anything that might fall underneath that as an umbrella. I think it's an ethics practice to throw in a strange word. Like it can only be kind of enlived as it is. It doesn't really make sense to talk about it a lot and to write about it a lot without also kind of put it into practice. And then also the other way around, kind of analyzing the practices to see what kind of analytical insights come from that. I also think that often people ask, like, okay, but human rewilding, what do I do? And I think there's not really, there shouldn't be any blueprints for it, because then it becomes again, almost a managerial approach to this. It's a fluid ethic practice, so to speak, that communities, individuals themselves would have to need to develop in order to make sense of it. I think transformation is often, to some extent, maybe relatively easy on the short term, but the question, of course, is where does the longevity sit, and how does the tand des tijds, the kind of the proof's in the pudding, I guess. So after 5 or 10 years, what's still left of a particular project or a particular initiative? And I think there's both personal but also cultural transformations very much needed there. So a couple of thoughts still beyond these principles. Yeah, you might ask, okay, so but how does it differ from regular nature-based engagement activities that I do? Well, I think human rewilding is really something that puts this ethical system up front, and the principles don't come in secondary. It's relational. It aims to address the root cause and therefore looks for system change instead of change within the system. And it goes hand in hand with transformation instead of being adaptive. And in that sense, we can also make a comparison to many other forms of nature recreation, which can be short-lived, which can emphasize technology use, which could emphasize speed. They can be destructive. They can be an escape from daily life, and they can be located away from home. Whereas I think we need to think much more about connecting to daily life and connecting to home. Yeah, and think big, to use that slogan at the start. Yes, I think this could be a interesting transition narrative for all kinds of disciplines or sectors of a society. And I don't have the answers to how to apply this human rewilding idea to different areas, and I can see a lot of overlap with other transition narratives. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be explored there. Now, finally, I want to say a couple of words about a very practical way in which we've been trying to rewild our own lives. This was a couple of years back. This is my partner, Gina. Together, we embarked on what we call this Wild Year, which was basically asking or posing, well, asking the question whether in a land without wilderness, the Netherlands, whether we could find wildness. And we also didn't want to escape it. We didn't want to go on a sabbatical for a year and go to Alaska or anything like that. We wanted to kind of acknowledge the commitments and the obligations that we had in the Netherlands, but then also weave in more nature connectedness. And so we thought, okay, can we, as a simple rule of thumb, say that we try to be on average a day throughout for every season, be outside for, well, be more outside than inside. So be outside for more than 12 hours. Yeah, and of course in summer this is easy enough, but can we also do this in wintertime and autumn? And this is how we started in autumn. This was in September. And we started off under a tarp, sleeping outside, and then we kind of also formulated this secondary rule. Okay, so then maybe we can sleep outside for a whole year, and that's also a good way of spending time outside then, and trying to kind of get to those 12 hours as well when you have to combine it with a job that also requires you to be inside. But yeah, finding wildness in a land without wilderness, I think also means looking at nature environments in a different way. Here we are in just an inner tent. There were a lot of mosquitoes out that night. And this is near a relative's house. And basically here we would sleep in the garden. And other people's places we slept in the city on a balcony, or anywhere from say a balcony, a city balcony, to the bigger natural areas in the Netherlands where we kind of did some wild camping as well, with the permission of the forester, and anything in between. So we really made a point of not just sticking with nature areas and being only in nature, but trying to find nature also in the kind of the gray spaces. Which also meant gardens, which you can see here, a tarp pitched, and us sleeping underneath the tarp. In wintertime, it was difficult to keep dry and warm. We made an open fire, like you can see here on the left, but then also you would have a tough night's sleep, because you would have to guard the fire and take it in turns, and every couple hours wake up and take your seat at the fire to keep it going, to manage it. And also the moist, you really need the fire to get rid of the moist, but then the moist also requires a kind of a more closed setting. So eventually we found this Scandinavian Swedish style teepee, which is inspired by the indigenous, the Sami people of Scandinavia. They would used to make them with deer skin or reindeer skin, but this is a more modern material, which had the advantage that it was easy to pack up and move. So within 15 minutes, we could kind of move around, which we did. We were in various places in the Netherlands. And then you can just about see there in the middle, this metal, if my cursor is visible, but you can see a little metal stove and a chimney there. And then indeed, a lot of time would go into preparation of wood, keeping ourselves warm. So here we cutting some feather sticks. And here you can see Gina tending the fire. So even, one night sleeping outside in autumn or winter kind of brings in that relationship with fire very quickly. And so you don't need to do a whole year of this. One evening, or sleeping one evening outside in a colder time of the year will instantly kind of rejuvenate our connection with fire. And for me, our connection with fire is also very much a connection with nature, and very much a connection with our evolutionary roots. I mean, for hundreds of thousands of years, we've sat around the fire, we've been nurturing the fire, and I think that's still very much in our genetic disposition. Right, coming to the end, to the conclusion. So I think human rewilding is an interesting idea. It's not that I blindlessly or always embrace it, but I think it's good food for thought. The way I read it, the way I interpret it and use it, it tries to address a root cause of environmental crises, very much at the root, also in a physical sense, being with your feet in the soil, connecting with the roots of the trees physically is also part of that. I mentioned inclusion and embodiment and integration and transformation. And I think this interweaving of ecological rewilding and human rewilding is really crucial. But I think more bigger than that, and going beyond this kind of nature conservation realm, is that I think we need narratives that are kind of all life encompassing and offer a positive vision, and then also connected that positive action on a personal as well as a communal and cultural level. That's what I wanted to say for the moment. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it made sense. But yeah, I'm very happy to take questions or to dive into a discussion with you about any of these topics or other topics. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Koen, for this wonderful learning session. Yeah, and is there anyone who wants to ask Koen a question? You can unmute yourself or ask the question in the chat.
I have a question. This is maybe a tricky one, Koen, and it's a question about how far you think we can push rewilding. Because what I was thinking, one of the species that interests me here in the Netherlands is the muskrat,
Yeah.
Which is not a native species. It was introduced and is now seen as a pest that has to be removed because of the way the Netherlands works, because it's all the water needs to be managed. How far do you think we can extend our sympathy for species that are regarded by some people at least as invasive, as weeds or pests?
Yeah.
Not an easy question, but
no.
well.
Yeah, no, I love that question. Thanks very much, Dominic. It's also one I don't have a simple answer to, but I would say that I would think that this very idea of invasive species management is also something that follows from a very strong managerial ecological discourse and way of thinking, in which we kind of assume that we can control a lot of what's happening in a natural sense. And I don't think we can. And when you talk of invasive species, you have some terrible examples in New Zealand and Australia, and their fight is something that has been ongoing for decades. And it's very much a kind of difficult between accepting what is there and what you have, and at the same time fighting and kind of acknowledging that native species are generally much more valuable for many reasons to the ecosystem, and having an intact ecosystem is so important. But I would say that a resilient ecosystem often deals with invasive species much better. So a muskrat is a problem for dikes, but then again, dikes are not nearly kind of a part of a natural environment, right? So place a muskrat in what we call an uiterwaard, like a river and overflow area, and their effects are much different. And I think what rewilding can do is make systems more resilient and place less emphasis on maybe individual species. Indeed, it requires that we are less engaged maybe with kind of be quite what's the word, like tense with particular species, red-laced species, and actually more kind of submit to natural processes. And I think this often has a lot of positive effects that we don't quite understand yet. But for instance, these riverine areas is one of the early examples of rewilding efforts in the Netherlands. What we now seen, I think there's the scientific evidence is slowly coming in, is that, for instance, with the high water and the floods, that these riverine areas are actually performing much better when there's a risk of flood, and form a kind of a natural buffer. So that's just one example of water capacities and dealing with that. But I think also in terms of species and the ecosystems, I have faith in say the resilience of nature, and I have less faith in the ability of managers to control everything that then often goes different anyway. And I think it's just often also practically not very possible, and that's apart from the philosophical debates. Does that make sense?
That's a very good, very, very well reasoned answer. Thank you.
Yeah.
More acceptance of our own, a bit more humility, if you like, in the face of natural system.
Yeah, and it can be extremely difficult because there's examples of ecosystems where entire species, multiple species, are wiped out because of the introduction of an invasive species, and that can be really heartbreaking and difficult to accept, but then equally often also difficult to counter or to do anything against. Interestingly, I just got an invitation the other day from the Dutch Ministry of Natural Affairs, LNV, Agriculture and Natural Affairs, and they were asking for input on the discussion of the social acceptability of killing invasive species in the Netherlands. And I got the feeling that what I would have to say to them is not really what they want to hear, because they want to see how to make it more acceptable. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Dominic, for your question and for your answer, Koen. Is there someone else who wants to ask or say something?
Yeah, otherwise I also have maybe a question for any of you, but I think there's a lot of overlap between the concept of regeneration as you use it and also this idea of human rewilding. So I'm just curious to hear from you, maybe from Franca, from you, or from anyone else. But am I the only one who sees the overlap, or would you agree? And where are maybe also major differences? I don't know.
Well, actually, Maya, my colleague from the RC, and she's organizing the winter season with me. She mentioned it through the chat, like it's the concept of rewilding and regeneration is overlapping a lot. So maybe you want to say something about it, Maya, because you texted it.
Yeah. So what I was thinking when I was listening to your story is that it's not just the concept of regenerating or rewilding our ecosystems, but also the systems that we engage in ourselves in. So you were saying like regenerating or rewilding the health system, and within the regeneration cooperation, we also think like how can we regenerate ourselves? How can we regenerate our community? So that were kind of the overlaps that I was hearing in your story that have overlaps in regeneration.
Yeah. And are there also crucial differences, you think, or important differences?
Well, I'm not sure yet, but I think what inspired me is well, I made a photo of it. It was let me see. Yeah, it was the nature-based human engagement and then the human rewilding. And I think that the one that being adaptive or transformative, that was kind of that stick to me, or change within the system or system change. I think for me personally, it's looking for it's not balancing, but yeah, I'm looking for ways to not be totally out of the system, like you already said, be in nature within your own region or in your own country and not go away. So for me personally, it's looking for that not fighting the system, but yeah, I don't know if you know what I mean, but it's sort of, for me,
Take
it's
Franco,
well, yeah.
for me, what I think is it looks really like a more holistic approach, that like the whole community or society. So with nature and everything within. It's not only looking to the nature part, but it's an all-inclusive version of it.
yeah.
That's what I've seen.
And I also think like rewilding stimulates regeneration, because rewilding means that you're part again of those natural systems and you feel part again and you see how important they are, and you're really creating relationship, which makes you don't want to hurt it and you want to like emphasize it more. And I think that's, yeah, people really, to start to regenerate, they really need to feel part again of that natural system. So I think it's also one stimulates the other, or like causes the other. Yeah.
I think ultimately. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Laura.
No, I'll continue. It's another question, so maybe after.
Yeah. No, I think ultimately, I think language is important in affecting change, and it obviously as a social scientist, I would also say that language determines to a large extent what we can think and how we think. But at the same time, it's not everything, and I feel that what's most important is actually the things that kind of happen either under the name of regeneration or under the name of rewilding or an all but name. And I see a lot of really good initiatives that I think, yeah, could you label it as rewilding? Yeah, maybe not. It doesn't really matter so much because it's happening and it's affecting a positive change. So that's kind of one thought that pops up a lot with me. At the same time, I also think that having a larger narrative, a transition narrative, is important, but I also realize it remains a bit of an echo chamber in the sense that, I suspect this is also the case with the word regeneration or regenerative, but it's certainly true for the word rewilding. Some social groups also see it straight away as something that you need to stay away from, or it can be very polarizing as well. For instance, rewilding used by George Monbiot in the Scottish or Welsh context. Some projects there have now stopped using the word rewilding because local farmers and so forth were just completely polarized and put off by these projects if they carried the word rewilding. So they're looking now for different words, different terminologies to find common ground. So it's also a question of really considering and understanding what language works where and when. At the same time, also trying to hold on to this larger narrative, these larger stories for transition that we need, I think. But yeah, sorry, Lara, you were gonna ask something, also say something else.
Yeah, and I was wondering, because you told a little bit about your like wild year or wilde jaar, or how you, but I was wondering like what were your like the special things you felt or you experienced, or some things that you took away from that year, personal experiences.
Yeah, thanks very much. It was it's such an important question, and I should have made that much clearer, I guess, in the presentation. But I mean, the inspiration is still ongoing from it. It's been a couple of years, but both my partner and I we still kind of build on it and kind of think about it, talk about it. So it's been in that sense a life-changing experience, even though we had lots of experience camping, wild camping, and spending lots of time outside. But doing that for a year and making it into this project was really something I think that we were in some ways proud of, if proud is the right word. But I think it was also when you do it consistently and you kind of push yourself a little bit out of your comfort zone, which we did. the connection that you then feel with nature. I mean, I don't really like using the word nature, but sometimes it is easy. The connection that you feel is is really deep and substantial, and it just kind of made us so convinced of this idea that you don't need to go far to connect with nature. You don't need to go into a faraway, remote area and a pristine nature area. You can really do it in your own back garden, but you kind of need to kind of find the buttons and turn the buttons in the right way to kind of create that space to engage. And it's physical, and I think, you know, you a lot of time of your day is then spent on preparing wood and so forth. So there's a paradox there, because you're doing a lot more practical stuff. You are physically engaged all the time, and yet at the same time you also feel much more relaxed and you feel you have more time. So and I think that paradox is something that is something that we don't really experience anymore in our daily lives, because in our kind of indoors lives. And and that's something beautiful. Yeah, that it goes to the core, I think. Yeah. Where are you at the moment?
I'm in Catalonia, in La Garrocha. That's where you're restoring a farm. So I really know what you mean by being more practical, like your daily practical stuff takes up a lot of time. But I really love it. It feels like real life. I don't know how to express it, but it's like, it makes you feel really human, and changes your life more. Yeah.
Koen, if I may ask, you were talking about being inclusive in rewilding. Can you talk a little bit more about that in the way you were doing that, or in the way you are doing that now?
I don't know if I'm performing this myself so well at the moment. One of the things that I find very engaging or challenging, and I try to engage, but is that somehow I end up, through when we give workshops or for students or in presentations, you still end up with people who have some kind of affinity with the topic, and it's often a type of middle class, indeed. I guess like ourselves, right? Usually well educated and so forth. And I think we need to think much more about how to enter into dialogues and how to invite other people beyond that group, so to speak, beyond the social stratum. And I have some ideas about it, and I think there's various initiatives that you can find in the Netherlands that do this really well, but it's also difficult and it takes time. I sometimes work now in a local hotel where there's a lot of refugees, and these people, I see kind of their worries, I see how they spend time, and they're on their phones speaking to family and friends back home a lot. They are waiting a lot. They are kind of spending time in this liminal space. And I keep thinking, like, gosh, it would be so nice even to go out with a small group, whoever's interested, into nature, and I can show them a couple of things of the local forest and what's happening. We could make a campfire. This would be so good and interesting, and also accepting that their understanding of nature might be very different from mine, entering into a dialogue. And I've had this idea now for a couple of years, but I still haven't pulled it off. And and I think that's so important, really, to do that. And there's a really nice example here. I live in Drenthe, and there's what they call School in het Bos. Maybe you've heard of it. It's from the gemeente Den Haag. And basically, any school in the gemeente Den Haag, in the municipality of Den Haag, can apply to be there for a week. and they have like all kinds. It's a tiny little village-like setup where they have prehistoric kind of cabin, and they go to a local biological farmer. So they do all kinds of nature-related or nature-based activities. They weave a bit. They go cycling. And what I love about it is that there they see all kinds of children from, say, the wealthy, middle, upper class people in Den Haag and the richer schools to, the poorest and kind of the socially most challenging areas. But the effect of the week, the experience that children has is pretty much similar for any child, which is a very positive and a very nurturing experience. So yeah, a bit of a long answer, but I'm kind of thinking along those lines then. Yeah.
Yeah, understandable. I think it's really interesting how you talk about the um, refugees and the way they could be mutually interesting for you, but also for them. That's really nice.
Yeah. But yeah, we need to do something with this. Yeah.
What is holding you back then?
It's just time, I think.
Of course.
And, yeah, we have two small children, and then all our weekends are pretty much fully booked for the coming half a year or a year, I don't know. So, but at the same time, it's also a matter of prioritizing, I think, right? So, yeah. But maybe if within your group there's people that think, hey, you should pick this up, or maybe something else around inclusion and nature experience, then let me know, because I would be very much interested in seeing what we could do.
Yeah, lovely invitation. There's someone else who wants to ask a question, and the invitation is there to put it in the chat. Vela, yeah?
I was curious what you think about like natural cycles within, because I've heard you a lot about rewilding and sleeping outside, and actually the previous online lecture we had talked about like all the different like natural cycles in the human body, but also in nature, from winter to spring to so I wonder how you see that concept within rewilding, because I kind of missed it in your story.
Yeah, no, I think it fits in really naturally, and yeah, there's so much to touch upon, and I think this is an important one. But I think it ties in with this idea of understanding who we are as humans and experiencing our own bodies as human again, instead of being some kind of office puppets or something, or city puppets. And yeah, this relates to all kinds of cycles. And during the wild year, the moon cycle became super important to us. So we always saw it, and we were really kind of engaging with it, talking about it a lot. Yeah, relating to it, looking at it. And this becomes so simple in a way, and when you're outdoors, and it can be the moon or it can be the robin that you hear every morning, but then you hear it differently a couple of months later. And that's exactly also why we opted for a year, because we wanted to do all 4 seasons, and how the seasons kind of move into each other. So yeah, I couldn't agree more. There is also a sense of, we often talk about a sense of place as an important component of nature experience. Like, you return to a place and you recognize a tree, or you recognize a certain process. But I think in a way there's also a temporal sense of place, which is a sense of time, I guess, which comes through cycles. And the exploration of that and the embracing of that is, yeah, I think super rich, and something that's again also in our genetic composition, but again something that we feel removed from because of the daily lives that we lead.
someone else. You can also ask for a second question.
Yeah, just maybe a practical question. When you sleep outside for a year, how does it cooperate with work and family and the stuff you do? How did you manage this?
Yeah, this is a bit of a disclosure, but we didn't have 2 young children yet.
Okay.
So that makes life much easier. We do talk about it sometimes now, like, okay, would it not be a great experiment to do it with the children as well? So maybe that will follow still. But yeah, I think mobility was important because we moved a lot between different job locations, and we just came back from Brazil, so we didn't really have a fixed location where a house or something like this. And Gina's job and my job were quite a bit apart, so we were mobile, and but that linked in really nicely with trying to be in different spots throughout the Netherlands, and different natural areas, as well as different people's friends' gardens. So what we also did is we made a point of visiting family and friends that normally you wouldn't see that often during a year, or maybe once every couple of years. Also to kind of share our story and to invite people. So we would sit outside together and make a fire with people. So it's kind of, I guess, those kind of little things that really, instead of seeing it as a challenge, really turned it into something that was just fun and that created energy for us, and I guess ultimately, because we went on for longer than a year, and then eventually, kind of through external reasons, we decided to stop. We had to go abroad as well. Someone got ill, and we wanted to spend some time near them. And but even today, we still try to be outside and to sleep outside quite a lot. And generally, we feel also that we sleep better outside. It's just, there's something about the cold and how your body reacts to it. It's just very fresh and rejuvenating. And we tend to lock ourselves up in very stuffed bedrooms. And even when we're now sleeping in a bedroom, we tend to open the window also in winter as much as we can, and so forth, to kind of feel that. And then you hear the owls again, or you hear the birds, and I can't actually remember. I'm babbling a bit now, I think, but does that answer your question a little, or?
Yeah, it does. Thanks. Yeah, I've been sleeping outside last year, like one day every month was a challenge, and I totally agree with feeling like almost crisp and fresh and connected with nature as well, instead of the computer where I sit behind 4 days a week. So totally agree. Thanks for your story.
But I also think, I talk about this as something as the most wonderful thing ever, and in many ways I see it like that. But at the same time, I think we also have to be honest that there are many barriers that kind of prevent us from going outside. Like sitting on the sofa when you're tired and watching a film is also nice, right? And putting your clothes in a washing machine, or opening the fridge and getting some food out, that's also fantastic. So I think sometimes it's also a bit like jumping into cold water. Like you have to break the barrier a bit, the barrier that's nurtured by modern life. You have to jump through it again to actually to take down this barrier and to really embrace it again. And this can be difficult. And also for us, I see sometimes you get into your rhythm again, your kind of urban rhythm, so to speak, your indoor rhythm, and then before you know it, you haven't spent enough time outside, and your body protests somehow, but you also forget to listen to your body. And this could be very simple things, like even just being in an office day, just going for a walk for half an hour or an hour, right? It's so easy to forget, or to just sit near a tree and just look at the tree for 10 minutes, So I keep reminding myself that these little yeah, these little activities, these micro adventures are just so important, I think, for a daily nature connection.
Yeah, totally agree, Koen. Thanks. And I think the balance when you, and if you're in nature and you go back to the hot shower and it's easy to just switch it on, you appreciate it more, I think.
Yeah, for
unless
sure.
you do it every day.
Yeah, exactly.
And for us, it's a luxury to go outside. I think a lot of people, well, in the world don't have the luxury we have. So it's also a first world problem almost.
Yes, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah.
We also have a comment of Maria. She has to pick up her son, but she said, we live in Amsterdam and our son goes to the BSO called Natuurfontein, and they always take them outside in nature, urban nature. But you clearly see the difference and how he changed the interaction with his body and understanding of being part of the environment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Lovely.
fantastic. Yeah. Because it all sounds, when you put it on a slide and you talk about relational and dichotomies and so forth, it all sounds very technical, but it's not. And I guess everyone knows this somehow, but at the same time, on a societal level, it seems to be so difficult to, this broader acceptance that we are in need of this, right? It's something I think a lot of us feel, but somehow employers and and kind of societal systems are not really catering for it either. Yeah.
Laura.
Yeah, I was wondering, Koen, because you talked about this year also in terms of sleeping. I was wondering, because for me, connection with nature even became really more strong through food, by foraging, by growing my own food, growing the food for the community here. And I was wondering if in this year you also experienced something with wild foods, or because I feel that's a very important part also from us being human, like the food chain and feeling that again.
Yeah.
Food chain.
Yeah, I agree. And I also included it in the kind of the image of all the areas we could rewild. And I think I put food there as a really important one, both in terms of our own consumption and also in terms of food production at a larger scale. We did quite a lot of foraging in the year. And we also tried to go to local, like a local farmer or so, and then trying to get food that was an offer there, so to speak, offer in inverted commas. But it wasn't a year where we were kind of self-reliant or but reliant on our own skills to collect food. So we also bought food or ate with people who cooked for us or something like this. I think it's probably doable, but it needs more preparation. And indeed, I think then gardening or some form of growing yourself becomes more important, because basically the carbs, that becomes a challenge, right? In the Netherlands, finding carbs in winter and spring is difficult. There's in the roots of the lisdodder, for instance. What's the English word for that? Cattail. You can find it, and it's actually really interesting during the hunger winter in the Netherlands. In the region where I live, in the Werebe area, a lot of people were actually harvesting cattail then. So it's knowledge that's still there. But I think if you do it then, and if you would think more of living off the grid and living off the land, then you would really need to think about harvesting in autumn as well, and then preparing it, drying meats, or putting it in pots or whatever you need to do to make sure that you can see it through winter and spring. I've done some experiments with going to Scotland and Sweden and just be there for multiple days, weeks, without food, but without buying food. But it depends so much on the time of the year, and I think of your community. So I would think that translating it more to indigenous settings, then you have a social ecological system where people are growing things, and then you're planning for the years ahead. So in a way, what we did now with this wild year, we could just kind of dropped ourselves into a situation and kind of enforced a couple of limitations, and I think that's an experiment. But I agree with you that experimenting with food and foraging and growing food yourself would be so crucial in a way in thinking about and doing these transformations. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, we have time for one more question or one more comment.
Yeah, maybe I can also add to that about food that there's some really interesting studies done on people that forage, either in cities or sort of natural areas or whatever, in a Western context. And this idea of liberation is so important as well that people mention. So feeling disconnected from a global supply chain of food and production chain that's problematic for all kinds of reasons, and really have this natural autonomy of that you decide where you go, what you harvest, under what kind of ethical conditions you harvest, whether you thank the plants, etc. That all that together as a package, I think, is for a lot of people very liberating. Yeah.
Nice. Thank you. Well, thank you, Koen, for your story and for answering all the questions.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Franca, and to everyone. I enjoyed the conversation, and I love what you're doing. So I hope that our roads will cross somehow in the future.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, I have 3 comments left, and then I will give the floor to Laura because she has something to say about the place where she is right now, a beautiful place. She lives there, obviously. First of all, I want to send you the link with all the events that are coming. So I'll put it in the notes or in the chat. And as I said, you can donate and contribute to the 4-season program, and without whatever suits you. And that's the Tiki link that you see in the chat right now. And then if you want to be a part of more of our activities live, but also online, and we don't have your email address yet, then you could put it in the chat so we can contact you, and you can you get the information for the next events that we're organizing, because the winter is not over yet, but we also already have a very nice program for the spring. And one of the activities in spring is are the regeneration weeks in Catalonia. So Laura, maybe you want to tell something about that.
Yeah, I just thought about just sharing really quickly. Part of the 4-season programs are the regeneration weeks that we do here on the farm in Catalonia, La Garrotxa. It is abroad, but you can go by train or share cars. Don't take any plane, please. And yeah, it's actually all about rewilding and being together and being outside actually all the time. You can sleep outside if you want. But it's our way of the Regeneration Cooperative to, being together, co-living together for a week and really living regeneration for a week. Experiencing also, because we live in a very special village here where, regeneration can be really felt, especially also social regeneration, because it's all about cooperations, all about helping each other out and being mutual independent again. So it's something that you gives a lot of hope. So that's why we organize these weeks. And that we do a lot of foraging, cooking with wild foods, Also learning from the kind of indigenous people here that have a way different worldview that we are used to. And yeah, also being outside a lot and seeing wild animals also. I saw the last days wild boar and deer again coming by, and it's really being in connection with the outside world. So I thought, yeah, maybe it could be nice also for the people here. We still have some spaces left. I will leave some information, and yeah, and it's part of this whole year season program. So I would really invite everybody to go through the seasons with us, learning together and regenerating together. Yeah, and also wanted to really thank Koen for sharing this really nice story. And yeah, really inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Well, and I experienced it myself in autumn, the Regeneration Week, and I will be there in spring as well. So I will be there for the second time. So that states how lovely it is to be there. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you again for being here and being part of the regenerative movement. I think we will meet again somehow in some way. And we like to see you in our next events, and stay tuned. And then I wish you a very good day. And then maybe we can unmute all together and say goodbye so we hear each other's voices.
Yeah, that's also nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Franka.
Bye.
Thanks, Koen.
Ja,
Bye
Koen.
bye.
Dankjewel, Koen.
Bye.